Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast today. Tuomo joins me, and we're going to discuss Next.js and some other kind of web development related topics. But before we get to that, Tuomo, could you maybe give me just a bit of your story when it comes to your tech career so far?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. My name is Tuomo Kankaanpää, and I'm based in Finland, and I've been working with code roughly maybe 20 years already. I started very in my teens when I started with these simple C programs with console applications and stuff just as a hobby, and then it was a hobby a few years, and then I went to University of Applied Science when I was 20, and then graduated from there as a Bachelor of Engineering, and got a job right out of university, and I've been in that same job right now for over 10 years. So it's been really nice. And in that job, I've been working with things like PHP and jQuery back in the days, more with those, and nowadays more with React and Next.js and C# mainly.
Gotcha. And what kind of made you want to go kind of the Next.js and React route with things?
Yeah, that was interesting. I think it was a few years ago when I ran into the term Jamstack, and through that I I got introduced with Next.js among a bunch of other site generators, and I really loved the idea of the web experience or the presentation layer being separate from your data and business logic. So that was really fresh idea, I guess. And through that, I just started to dabble with Next.js, doing some projects and learning Next.js. And then I decided to actually make my own website and blog at the time with Next.js. And I think that was really good, learning experience on Next.js. And I really get to work with Next.js on a kind of real project and see how it handles that. So yeah, I really just love the developer experience of it mainly.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the common answer that I tend to get with people that kind of like Next.js. Maybe the main thing that they like about it is kind of that developer experience with it, to where they do just provide a lot of nice things out of the box, whether it's the kind of built-in router or built-in ways to write server code and route handlers and different things like that. It is a very nice kind of developer experience there. And kind of along those lines, I'm guessing you probably started with Next.js when it was kind of with the page router. Is that correct?
Exactly. It was back then. And that's a good point what you made about the it comes with a lot of stuff already out of the box. So that was, I think, one of the reasons also why I like to work with it, because you didn't have to spend time configuring different packages and routers and all that stuff. So it was really easy to just get the project up and running and host it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that when I first started, I think I kind of just would use create React app and stuff like that. And, at the time that was great, but you did kind of have to go through a lot of boilerplate of, okay, install React Router DOM, then wrap your entire page with a provider. And then, if you also wanted to do some server side stuff, then you have to, run your own Express server and then kind of get that going. And it was just kind of a lot of, boilerplate that you had to put together, to where Next.js kind of just, takes care of that for you and allows you to focus on the actual building of your application. And kind of with that, I was kind of leading with that question about Pages Router, because now, as I'm sure Next.js has gone to kind of the app router way of doing things. And with that kind of led to, several kind of different changes, whether that is server components or kind of just different project structure and different things like that. So maybe I would like to, from your perspective, do you kind of like this transition to the app router? And then If so, are there certain like features that you like about it, or how are you kind of feeling about the transition between the pages and app router?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I've been using the app router once it came out and building stuff with it, and also of course with the pages router. And I kind of like it, like the app router. I really like the way it does things, and just to like enables the server component usage also by default. So that feels nice. Although I'm not really sure if like are they 100% like production ready, or like is there still some problems with those? But overall, it feels like everything works really well, and I really like the way they are going. And yeah, right now the server actions are in alpha, I think, and that's really an interesting feature to have, like to define your endpoints in your component without the need of making separate route handlers or API routes. So I think that's also a really interesting feature to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that alongside server components, you also can make a lot of your requests directly from just a server component, and maybe it removes the need in some areas to even have a route handler in the first place, which I also kind of find kind of nice. But I do definitely agree that I feel like they are still kind of working out the kinks a little bit with server components to where there's still some challenges with, if you're using authentication in a lot of places in your app, and like you're using kind of a web-based authentication and you're not using like cookies or something like that, you can kind of run into a lot of different kind of confusing errors when trying to use server components. So there are, I feel like, still some kind of trickiness there. And I think that a lot of external libraries are also still trying to like catch up to server components and provide kind of better support there, because I think a lot of external libraries, they still assume that you're running in just like a JavaScript web environment rather than on the server in Node. So I think there are definitely still some kinks there.
Yeah, I agree, and like I think it will get better with time, but with this kind of bigger changes, it always takes some while to actually get everything, every libraries and everyone on board it. So I'm hoping to like see improvement in that for sure in the future. But maybe now at the moment it's still a little bit. It works, and most of the things work, but you might still need some customization, so to say, for certain situations, for example.
Is there any kind of core concepts or fundamentals of Next.js that you think are important for maybe someone that's kind of newer to it, that maybe they're used to writing, maybe just vanilla JavaScript apps, or maybe they're used to just using Create React app? Is there any kind of core concepts of Next.js that you think are really important to understand?
Very good question. Well, we've been talking about the app and pages router. I think that's one thing to actually really core concept to realize how they work and what their differences are. So of course, the pages router being the original router and app router being the newer one with support for the server components. But also I think like on maybe a higher level, I think one thing to realize or understand well is, which helps you along the way, is to actually understand when and where your code is run, so to say. So is it run on the browser, on the client, or is it run on the server, or is it even run on the or in the build time? So most often, like when you're developing with Next.js, those are things that you necessarily don't need to like think about. But in my experience, at least, whenever you need to do some debugging when something doesn't work, it's usually, or it's many times important to understand that where the code is run, because you're thinking that it's run on the, for example, in the client, but it's actually run on the server, and that way it's like harder to get the grasp on what's wrong in the given issue. But yeah, I think those two are at least two core concepts that you you should understand and dive into. It really will make like developing with Next.js much easier.
Absolutely. I think that understanding where your code is running, and like there's a lot of options that you have in Next.js. Like you have running on the server, you have, like you said, running on the client, but you also have running on the edge. So you kind of have a lot of different ways. And then you can also, like you mentioned, you have different kind of cloud functions and stuff that you can do there. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, and it can be tricky to kind of know where your code is being executed, and the environment it's being executed can have like some different effects on kind of what behavior you're seeing. And is there like a particular way you like going about debugging? Like, I know for myself personally, I just throw a bunch of console logs everywhere, just kind of like see what happens. But do you have like a certain way that you like to debug, or how do you kind of like to approach that?
I think the like correct answer would be to say that I use breakpoints, but I gotta admit I use console logs also. So that's most often the way, like logging stuff and trying to understand what's happening in the code. I don't know if I have any specific like way of doing it, but I think one thing that often helps that me included sometimes ignore is just like if you get the error message, actually reading the error message, it's really important, and most often that has the answer already, or it points you to the right direction when you read what it says. So I can't even tell how many times I like just see that, oh, there's an error, I started to change things, but then after a couple of hours I take and read the message and it says loud and clear what's wrong.
I am in the exact same mode. I can't tell you how many times I've, just gone through all my application like, there's an error. This isn't working like I expect. I don't even open the console to even see if there's like any errors or anything like that. I just go try to, mess with the code. And then an hour later, I see in my console, it's like, okay, this certain object you're trying to access undefined or some, stupid error that you're getting like that. And, I would save a ton of time if I actually just, read the error message, processed it, and went and like, these days you could probably just copy the error message, paste it into like ChatGPT and say, hey, what's going on here? And that will probably point you in the right direction. So
exactly, that's really, or that's true. And it's really easy to like, for common errors, there is always someone who has run into it already. You can use ChatGPT or just Stack Overflow. So yeah, that's a good way to wait 10 seconds before doing anything when you get error message.
Absolutely. And when you were, we've kind of covered some mistakes that someone can make, with their error messages, not actually reading them. And then also maybe a mistake is not necessarily knowing where your code is running and then making certain assumptions leading to kind of bugs or issues in your code. Are there any other mistakes that maybe you see other people make? I know with your YouTube channel, maybe you get people that comment on your videos like, hey, I'm running into this issue, or maybe even mistakes that you've made when you were kind of starting out with the Next.js. Is there anything that kind of comes to your mind as something to kind of look out for a little bit?
Things that were hard for me or with what I have struggled. I think really the one I mentioned already, the understanding where your code is run is something that I struggled a lot, at least in the beginning. Especially when it was with the pages router, there was this get static props, get server-side props functions, and understanding really where they are run. Nowadays, I think it's a bit more easier with the app router because everything is by default server component, but I can still understand still that it can be hard to wrap your head around where the code is actually run, even with the app router. But, and especially if you're coming from like just using Create React App, for example, it can be really confusing.
And for understanding where like the code is being run, is there a certain like process that you went through to kind of better understand where your code was being run? Or was it a matter of reading documentation and like seeing where Next.js is, the distinction is between some of these kind of components? Or how would you maybe recommend someone actually going through and learning kind of where their code is run?
Yeah, a really good question. I think for me at least, just like I would say that play around with it. So don't try to like just or like play around with it. Just make some dummy application and just test things out, like with the console log, for example, seeing where it logs the answers. And I think it's good to read the documentation, and most often it gives a good information, but I think that's not enough alone. So complementary for that, by just like playing around with the code and with different kind of components and approaches. That's really something that at least I learn most when I do that. And that's actually a funny thing, because many times for my videos on my YouTube channel, there is something, for example, like server components versus client components. I don't necessarily like understand it fully when I'm starting to make the video, but once I'm like preparing for the video and to teach it, I need to go through the process of like just banging my head to the wall and seeing what happens. So that really helps for me.
Yeah, absolutely. My general process that I like to follow to learn something new is like gain just like a high level overview of how it works. So maybe that's watching like a crash course or a YouTube video or something like that. And then from there, I actually also like to kind of read that section in the docs, or reading the docs too, as you know, I find I personally learn pretty well from actually like taking the time to read something and kind of go through that way. And then like the third aspect that you also mentioned there is taking the time to also play around with it. And then if possible, either like rubber duck it with yourself and like talk it through to yourself of how things are working, or even creating a blog post or a YouTube video or something like that as to explain something. Like you really have to know kind of how it works and kind of understand how things are kind of connected and put together. So I think that, you know, really trying to make sure that you play around with stuff and, you know, get a good handle of it, and really ask yourself like, okay, you know, if someone asked me about this in an interview question, how would I explain it to them right now about how everything's working? And then, you know, just talk things out with yourself or make a YouTube video or a blog post. And I think that will definitely help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good point what you made, like explain to yourself or someone else, or rubber duck it with someone. When you have to explain something, you like realize how much you know and what things you don't know. So that's really good process. And one thing I would like to add for that is also that you don't have to like learn something on one sitting. So at least for me, it often helps to just walk away from it for a day or two, then come back to it, and like your brain will process the things when you're not thinking about it, and it's much easier to come back to it in a couple of days, for example.
You know, absolutely. I know that for my, you know, professional job, I have various tickets throughout my kind of 2-week sprint that we have. And if I get stuck on a ticket, often just switching to something else for the rest of the day and then coming back to that ticket the next day when I just kind of am more fresh, I stepped away from it a little bit. I often end up solving it when I just, you know, give myself a second to come back to it. Because I think that, you know, once you start getting stuck on something and like you just can't break through it, you kind of can get frustrated. Like you kind of feel like, oh, I've Googled every kind of Stack Overflow post on this and I still can't figure it out. Sometimes just stepping away and coming back to it is really helpful for sure. So I kind of think with that, maybe a final question before we kind of get to our kind of rapid fire round here is, what is your process for creating a project in Next.js, or even just a project in general? Like for me personally, I tend to like to just dive into the code and just start working and just kind of see what comes about it. But sometimes that can come back to bite me, and I realize like, if I would have spent some more time ahead of time designing this, it probably would have went a little bit better. So like, what's your process maybe just from scratch to kind of create a new project? Do you like to, you know, maybe make some designs on Figma or something like that? Or are you like me and just hop into the code and then sometimes that goes well, sometimes it doesn't? Or how do you kind of like to approach that?
Yeah, I think the good way is like a balance between those. So jumping right in the code and designing something. But I gotta admit, I'm pretty much like you in that aspect. I just like to get my hands dirty and jump right into the code. And I just find it most natural way for me. And I actually made a couple of weeks ago a video on my channel where I built this Next.js marketing website from scratch in that video. And that, I think, really showed the process that I go through really well. And that process in that case was that I just created a fresh project and then it was a web page with like a couple of sections like navigation, hero section, services, pricing, etc. And I just like created a component for each section and then started to like work on each component one by one, adding the code for it, the styles for it. And then at the end of that step, I had all the components ready. And then I could, the idea was to hook it up with a headless CMS. So once I got the structure and everything ready, I jumped into integrating the application with the headless CMS and actually pulling the data from the headless CMS instead of like hard-coded values that I had just inputted in that first phase. So I think that's like for me the most natural way to jump into the code and go like in those kind of steps for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's very similar to how I like to approach it as well. Like I said, I tend to not like do a entire Figma design or something like that because, I'm just like, hey, by the time I finish this Figma design, I could be like halfway done with this project by now. So that's kind of how I approach it. But I tend to also like to build out like just kind of the dummy UI first with maybe some dummy data and stuff like that. And then kind of once those components are in place, kind of wire it up to, a headless CMS or maybe some other API that I want to use for that project or something like that. So generally I like a very kind of similar approach there. So kind of with that, as maybe just a few kind of quick questions here. So maybe in like 3 sentences or less, let's see what you got to answer for these questions here. So for the first one, and we definitely already covered it a little bit here, but maybe also within this question, maybe include like how you prefer to style and maybe if you like to use a CMS or different APIs or authentication, but what is your kind of overall preferred tech stack?
Yeah, well, it depends really on the project most of the time, but mainly what I like to work with is just Next.js with TypeScript, maybe Tailwind with the styling, and then if I need to store some data, I will store it in a Postgres database or a headless CMS, depending on the situation.
What's the best way that you think someone can become a better developer?
Yeah, well, first, I think we all already kind of covered it, is to like build something, because just like watching something and not coding it is something that is just one part of it. So actually build something. And then I think also one other thing is to like ask questions. So if you're unsure of something or don't know something, just go ahead and ask questions. I know at least I much rather answer a question than try to fix a problem that could have been avoided by asking a question.
What is one thing that you wish you would have known when you just first started coding a while back?
Maybe the fact that no one knows everything. Like there is no shame in saying I don't know, but the key is more like saying that I don't know, but let me go and find out. So maybe that's one thing that I would say to myself.
I really like that, as I think people can often, when they're watching, YouTube tutorials and stuff like that, like often I will create an entire project and then I'll go create it for YouTube. So it's like I've already done a lot of this stuff before and I had to figure it out when I was just kind of in the testing phase of figuring out how this worked. And I think often people are like, should I just know how to do all this off the top of my head and like connect to this API without even looking at the documentation and all this stuff? I'm like, no, that's not how I do it. Like I know how to do pretty much none of this when I first started this project. So I think that like just understanding that, and then, an engineer I work with that is really, really awesome. He's always like, I don't know how to do this right now, but there's a solution to everything. And I think that is just a great way to kind of approach things to where you don't need to know how to, solve every single problem when it comes up. But there's most definitely a solution out there. It might not be like the perfect solution based on how you've architected things, but there is going to be a solution there. So I really like that one. And I just turned this rapid fire round into a much longer. But to move on to the final question here, what do you think about kind of AI over the next several years? Like, do you think that AI is going to take developer jobs, or how are you kind of feeling about that whole space right now?
Yeah, a good question. I think it's really like using AI and what we can do with AI even today is pretty amazing. And of course, you can never know about the future, but like I like to believe, and I think that like it won't get that good that it, for example, take our jobs. But like I like to use it in certain aspects right now or certain problems, but there is also some defects right now, which hopefully get like better with years to come.
Yep. And I feel very similarly. I think that for a while at least, it's going to be developers using AI and just being a bit more productive. But, it's hard to say. A decade from now, maybe we will have such good kind of AI interfaces to where people can basically create projects by just adding a few prompts, and then their idea will come about, and they don't, really need developers much for that. But I think at least over the next several years, I think it's going to be developers with AI. But further out from that, it's, I think, really nobody knows at this point.
Yeah, I think so too. And like one, I don't remember the name, but like I think Virtual had this application right now where you can make like UIs with AI. So you can just say like, make me a user card, and it will write the code actually for you, so for that user card. So I think that could be something that we are going towards too.
Absolutely. Well, on that almost somber note there, to kind of wrap here, where can people kind of go to find you? Make sure to give your YouTube channel a shout out, and anywhere else that people should go to kind of find you online.
Yeah, I'm probably the best place is my YouTube channel, as you mentioned, youtube.com/Tuomo Kankaanpää, or just search my name from YouTube and it should pop up.
And I'll definitely make sure to have your handle linked in the description below as well. I know that I had a hard time pronouncing your name, so for us American folks, I'll make sure that that's linked for them as well. So, with that, Tuomo, thank you so much for coming on today. I definitely enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great to be on.